Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Ento24. My name is Simon Ward. I'm the Chief Executive of the Royal Entomological Society, and it's really great to see so many of you here today and joining us online. I'm delighted to welcome you, whether you're joining us from this country or from a number of other countries. We've got representatives here from 38 different countries during the conference. We've got 250 people joining us in person with a further 66 people online, which is the biggest Ento that we've ever had. They'll be presenting 158 talks and posters, and we'll be showcasing your fascinating research. So it's really great to see so much cutting edge and innovation in insect science that's going on, and it'll be really exciting to hear so much more during the week. It's especially heartening to see the vast majority of you attending as members and fellows of the Society. We're looking to grow this conference in its size and its impact and maintain its medium-sized feel, and so everyone can get to see everyone and we can use it as a networking event as well. But making sure that it remains affordable and accessible to make sure that as many people can come along as possible. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to the University of Liverpool for hosting us and to the entire RES staff team for their tireless work in bringing this event to life. A special thanks goes to our events manager, Amy Everard. Amy's done an exceptional job in growing not just this conference, but our entire events calendar, both online and in person. And Amy will be leaving us in October, but her contributions are invaluable, and we wish her the best for the future. So thank you, Amy. This year's conference wouldn't be possible without the dedication and expertise of our conveners. We are fortunate to have the support of conveners from 4 different institutions in the region. I'm going to pronounce these wrong, but Sharon Zintinska from the University of Liverpool, apologies. Chris Williams from Liverpool Johns Moores University, Chris Jones from the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and Michelle Davis from Edge Hill University. The strength of their individual and combined scientific programming ideas is clearly reflected in this week's great program of plenary speakers, talks, posters, workshops, mixers, meetups, and more. I would also like to make sure that in your diaries tomorrow during the poster session, we will be having a pitch the paper event. If you've got any ideas about potentially publishing in the future, we will have editors from all of our different journals there, and they'll be very keen to talk to you about any ideas you've got. So there'll be representatives there from all 7 journals. So please do go along and speak to them, whatever stage you're at. It could be way in the future, but please do speak to them, because publishing in society journals is really important, because the money that goes back into the community. So we really would love to see your papers published in the journals. I have a few housekeeping notes, so just to go through those. I won't keep you for too long before we get going with the really exciting first lectures. We are in lecture theatre 1 of Teaching Hub 502. This area is where all of the session rooms are, where the 2 lecture halls, workshops or smaller meetings will take place. If you have a talk, please make sure you head to your lecture theatre to upload your talk as soon as you can. Don't leave it till the last minute. There are toilets, including accessible toilets, downstairs behind the exhibition hall and up here in the teaching hub. Downstairs, you came in via registration to Mountford Hall, and Mountford Hall is the main exhibition hall where you'll find our 10 Ento24 exhibitors, the RES stand, poster presentations, draw your study insect, and all the catering during the conference, so very important for the coffee. The main catering point is at the bottom of the stairs before you enter the exhibition hall. There are multiple tables, so please do make sure you use all the tables to avoid bottlenecks. And once you have your food and drinks, make your way to the main hall to explore. Some seating is provided in the main hall, but you can also use seating in the corridor as you enter the building, but this is also open to other university users. There is also a contemplation room in study room 6 up on this level, which can be used for prayer or for a quiet moment. There are no fire alarms scheduled during the conference, so any alarms should be treated as an emergency. In case of emergency, please follow staff to the nearest emergency exit and assemble in University Square. If you need first aid assistance, please find a member of the RES team who will be able to take you to the appointed first aider. So, without further ado, I will hand over to the conveners and we will start Ento24. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. On behalf of Liverpool John Moores University, It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to Liverpool in this, the 201st year since our university was established as the Liverpool Mechanics Institute in 1823. So you missed the bicentennial by just 1 year. I hope we have brought together an exciting programme, and I'd like to thank my co-conveners, Michelle, Sharon and Chris. I'd also like to thank Richard Harrington from the Meetings Committee, Luke Tilley from the RES, and most especially Amy Everard, whose excellent organisational skills kept us on the straight and narrow. Finally, I'd like to thank you all for submitting your talks and posters, and I hope that this conference will be a most edifying and convivial experience for all.
Hello. So I'm Sharon Satinska from the University of Liverpool. I'd just like to welcome you to Liverpool, to the university. And I'm looking forward to seeing lots of talks about aphids are my special insect, but I also like microbiome work. So very excited to see all the talks that are down for this week. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ento24. My name's Christopher Jones. On my lanyard, it says Christopher, but only my nana calls me Christopher. So it's Chris Jones. I am a lecturer at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and our campus is situated on the other side of the Victoria red brick building that you'd have seen across the street from where we are now. My interests are in mosquito ecology. And at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, we have our vector biology department. We sort of pride ourselves on having a very diverse sort of research in our department, and that should be hopefully reflected in some of the talks that we'll hear in the vector sessions. I've already seen a few familiar faces from my past, and I'm looking forward to also meeting some new faces. So yeah, welcome and thank you.
My name is Dr. Michelle Davis. I'm from Edge Hill University, which for anyone who knows Liverpool is not actually in Edge Hill. We're up the train tracks in Ormskirk. We're one of the smaller universities, but we do have a large and growing entomology cohort. It will be growing even more once we convince the biomed half of the department to move into their new building. It's a year late. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to Liverpool and to Liverpool University. It's my first time here as well. Okay, so shall I introduce? Yeah. I also have the pleasure of introducing our first plenary. We would like to thank Harper Adams University for sponsoring this plenary. Harper Adams are the University for Food Production and Technology, Animal Health and Wellbeing, and are known for their contributions to sustainability and providing a living environment for our planet's inhabitants. They're advancing knowledge, inspiring learners, and equipping people to find creative, sustainable solutions to economic and environmental challenges facing our planet. Harper Adams are here as exhibitors down in our hall, so we encourage you to speak to them at their stand. I have the pleasure of introducing our plenary speaker today, Professor Michael Samways, an Emeritus Distinguished Professor at Stellenbosch University, South Africa, where his research in insect conservation covers a broad range of areas from philosophy to implementation at both national and international levels. To list all of Michael's contributions and publications would take far longer than anyone is prepared to listen to me talk for. According to ResearchGate, Michael has 572 publications, from his earliest work in the 1970s on crickets to his most recent paper published in June this year, reviewing the diversity of arthropods in the Greater Cape Floristic region. And of course, his latest book, Conservation of Dragonflies, Sentinels for Freshwater Conservation, which was also published earlier this year and is available at the CABI stand downstairs, I noticed. Michael's contribution to the field of entomology have been widely recognised through the numerous and varied awards he has received, including the John Herschel Medal of the Royal Society of South Africa, the IUCN SSC Chair's Citation for Excellence, and our own Marsh Award for Outstanding Exemplary Lifetime Contribution to Insect Conservation. Today, Michael is going to be drawing on his wealth of knowledge to give our opening plenary, Caring for Irreplaceable Insects, Effective Conservation Strategies in Biodiversity Hotspots. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Oh, yes. You got to be sober to do this. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Michelle, and thanks to the Royal Entomological and Harper Adams University for enabling me to be here. Now, this is absolutely true. Richard may actually be a member longer than I, but I've been a member of the Royal Entomological for 50 years. And over that time, the evolution of this incredible society has been so dynamic from those days at South Ken. It was a lovely old building. They're moving to St. Albans, also absolutely beautiful. But it's quite interesting because about the time I became a member, the Institute of Biology here in Britain did a survey of longevity of various professions. And the longest living profession of all were entomologists. Can you believe it? Entomologists? Well, they looked into why, because they were driven people, motivated, they had a good lifestyle, they were overall very happy. The shortest livers were the financial people. So the moral of the story is, if you're under stress, but you want to make a lot of money, become a banker. But if you want to be very happy, have a fulfilling life, then become an entomologist and a member of the Royal Entomological. So let me take you on a journey to the southern tip of Africa. But let's start off. Whatever we do in life, Confucius would say, think long, work quickly. So why do we do insect conservation? When millions of insects have gone extinct over historical time, but because the extinction crisis, we're causing it. So it behoves us to get it right. Now, this is a really interesting paper by Shakad Lavandera. Now, I know Conrad well, he's done a lot of work on the Cretaceous extinction event. And although we hear so much about it and how the dinosaurs went extinct, the insects pulled through relatively well. And he has studied umpteen interactions with insects and plants and so on. They're saying this might be the first insect mass extinction, not right now. And the reason being because the landscape transformation, global climate change is global. Whereas the end of the Cretaceous, when you watch TV and you see this big meteorite hitting the Yucatan Peninsula, you hear all the dinosaurs died out, it wasn't like that across the whole world. And a lot of insects found refuges in various parts of the world and pulled through. Now, let's just have a little bit of entomological chauvinism. Of course, obviously, plants have the greatest biomass. But interactions, insects and plants, far outweigh many of the other when it comes to vertebrates. Of course, we know there are many others, the fungi, microbes, and so on. But let's just stick to these three groups. But diversity, of course, as we all know, is enormous. Now, it's interesting because there was huge debates a few decades ago on the intrinsic value. And intrinsic value held the moral high ground, particularly driven by philosophers like Ernest. But a very interesting paper by Justus Estelle in 2009, they argued very cogently when it comes to conservation, the only real methodology that really works and is understandable by people that drive conservation, particularly policymakers and funders, is to use the instrumental value. That is interesting because with IPBES in the Nature Futures framework now, intrinsic value has come back. And it's quite interesting. It's come back because of nature for nature. In other words, intrinsic value has come back into favor again. It's because of the interactions. Now we're learning so much of the fuzzy edge between individuals, the fuzzy edge between populations, species, even species and so on, with symbiosis, mutualism, all sorts of interactions in the interaction network. intrinsic value has come back sitting side by side with instrumental value and relational value. Now, we're well aware of the consumptive value. And here is going back to 1770, one of the earlier painters that went to the Southern Cape. And here the Khoisan roasting grasshoppers, which is actually quite amusing when you can see where that arrow is, the nice juicy quacker in the background there, why they would bother with little grasshoppers. But anyway, there we go. And of course, there's other instrumental value that we're well aware of. But I don't know, you could consider these beer bottles as cultural value. Now, the point is conservation is a human activity. We think it's all about organisms, but it's a human activity and it's about policy. And it's associated largely with political boundaries. It doesn't matter whether it be in a county, a country, a region, whatever. Mostly because that's where the funding comes from to do conservation. And it must be effective. We can write about conservation, but we also need to give the evidence of what is successful and what isn't. Now, I'm giving you quite a few references. You don't have to read them, but I'm just going to put them there as kind of items of evidence in the court of scientific justice. Now, if we go to Southern Africa, there's been no glaciations for over 200 million years. It's got a rich and ancient topography, and the tips of the mountains there are much, much older than the Alps, the Andes, and almost all mountain ranges in the world that have peaks in the current moment. And it's extremely rich in endemics. It has 3 of the world's 36 biodiversity hotspots all around the rim of the country. Now, there are many new discoveries still being made. These 2 dragonflies here on the left, we only discovered those in 2003. Literally only 30 kilometers as the crow flies from our university in the mountains. A new order of insects was discovered in 2002, the hill walkers. And in my pick at UCT, literally, he can virtually see it out of his office window, discovered a new group of cockroaches that kind of behave like grasshoppers. Now, the insect and plant diversity is extraordinarily rich, with many specialist pollinators from long-time flies and monkey beetles, as well as bees and wasps. But it's also very rich in endophytic species. But these interactions are very complex, and spatial scale plays a very important part. Now, I'll just give you one example. This is the Betiscoides grasshoppers. They're flightless grasshoppers. And we thought there were only 4 or 5 species, but molecular work has shown there's well over 24 species. They specialize on these reed-like grasses. They're not strictly grasses, but they're restios. Also, the age of some of these insects is incredible. The yellow prisma here, Gracilis, is 59 million years old. 59. So it evolved in the Paleocene, Eocene maximum, thermal maximum. So these Cordula dragonflies are extremely old, but the same goes for these damselflies at the bottom right, the malachites, also extremely ancient. Now, we've been doing some work on endemic hotspots, and this is species diversity. This is dragonflies across Africa. And not surprisingly, the Congo region comes out up top. But you can see the Cape at the bottom there is very rich. But I just want to point out the importance of discovery. You see Angola is also, the Angolan highlands, is also in orange there. And that's because of a lot of recent work there. That orange spot was not on the map if you go back, say, 10, 20 years ago, but it's now on the map. It just shows the importance of discovery and richness. So In the country, one expects the greatest richness up in the northeast, which is savanna, which is true. But when we look at endemism, it's highest in the mountains, particularly the southwest and the Drakensberg Mountains. Now, if you look at the area species richness, and this is dragonflies again, there's pretty much a straight line across the Western Indian Ocean. And the point is that a lot of these dragonflies in these ancient islands have endured huge climatic fluctuations in the past. But we found these endemics that are very sensitive to novel threats. Now you see this, the Cape Floristic region Sky Islands fit that oceanic island curve rather well. The Cape Peninsula in the center there is offset because that's the peninsular effect. Species richness decreases towards the tip. The Seychelles, Silhouette, Praslin, Mahé are granitic islands. So they're above the curve, but the Seychelles, this whole gray palette-shaped area, but below the curve, they are coralline islands, which are not rich. It's really those granitic islands that are not. So what are the drivers of change? Now, fire's natural, with a huge amount of adaptation amongst insects, but it's now more frequent than in the past, and it's adversely synergistic with invasive alien trees. Now, when fire appears, you can see the smoke coming. Insects of all types are incredibly sensitive. They immediately respond, fly away or go to ground. When the fire goes through, a lot of the plants in the area are fire adapted, and they spring up after the fire. What happens is the refuges left behind after the fire's been through, and it's in these refuges where the insects retreat. Now, you take this riverbed, for example, whereas the edges are burnt, the riverbed remains green. That's a refuge. And that same yellow presbyr, it goes immediately from the top of the mountains where it forages to down into the riverbed and stays close to the water, away from the fire. And you think, well, it's had 59 million years to get it right. Now, with terrestrial insects, it's quite interesting. You see the fire front go across, and when you look at the survival afterwards, you see this is a burnt landscape here. And what happens, the pollinators will go to these refuges in the little ravines or on screes or simply areas that haven't been burnt. Now, flowers are important for bees and monkey beetles, but logs are important for flies. So the taxa overall are well adapted to fire. They immediately find fire refuges, but it differs among taxa the extent to which they do it in one particular area. 6 months after a fire, you wouldn't believe it. Here's the flowers. This is literally 6 months after a major fire. You can see in the background there's black soil. They're up and they're flowering. The pollinators suddenly appear within 6 months of a major fire. Now, they've also survived El Nino southern oscillations. The river insects will use suboptimal pond habitats just to pull through times of drought. We found that artificial ponds, so long as they have a high quality, provide refuges. When the water level drops, there's different behavior. Water beetles leave, but bugs and dragonflies, they stay around for a while. They sort of wait a bit more for the rain to come. And we found that various ponds of various water levels with high plant heterogeneity are the best. But the modeling we've been doing recently suggests that drought is the major threat in the future. Homogenization. We found, at least with the dragonflies, urbanization and agricultural transformation are more or less equal in their impact in terms of homogenization of river dragonflies. The other real problem are invasive alien trees. Now, this picture here looks like a typical sort of Mediterranean type climate, but those trees are alien running along that riverbed. They're Australian acacias with some pines there too. And what these aliens do is dry out the streams, shade out the habitats, and increase the fire risk. Now, the footprints of alien plants is greater than agriculture. They're absolutely devastating. But the flip side is when these alien trees are removed, insect recovery can be extremely good, encouraging for restoration, and the soil is very much still intact. And another, just a little aspect with aliens, it's very important not to put them all in the same box. Small groups of alien pines are retained in certain areas. These are contained areas of pines. They're not just being left to go anywhere. For the Cape leopard. Now, for carpenter beech, wood is in short supply. So having this foreign wood there helps provide a limited resource. Now, what about the aliens? Now, up in the top right there, the harlequin beetle, very familiar to you here in the UK as an alien, but we also have these others up the top there that are alien where we are. Now, the Argentine ant and alien pine trees are adversely synergistic. They cause a decrease in the Camponotus ants. And these ants are really important because they burrow a lot of the fynbos seeds. There's a little lysome on the seeds. And so the ants play a very important role. And together, the Argentine ant and the alien pine trees are bad news for the Camponotus and some other ants that bury seeds. So what are we doing to conserve insects? So the various approaches, obviously, the species, protected areas, biosphere reserves, restoration, and so on. In terms of, just to let you know what we've been doing in terms of national red listing, the biggest problem for butterflies is habitat loss. From dragonflies, it's invasive alien trees. And I just mentioned colophon, these intriguing stag beetles only live in the tops of mountains. And they actually evolved in the lowlands, but they've retreated over the millions of years into the mountains. And you find different mountains have different species of these colophon. Now, protected areas are playing a very important role in the Cape Floristic region. And PAs function well for insects across the country. And at least in the Cape, for example, all red-listed dragonfly species occur in protected areas. They are often the last refuges. Now, the agricultural area in yellowy orange here, that looks terrible. You think, well, agriculture is covering the whole area. But actually, that's not entirely true because there are biosphere reserves. There's a huge move to agroecology in the country. And 738 globally, these are UNESCO biosphere reserves of 3 zones with a core zone, total protection, buffer zone, semi-protection, transition zone with a bit more agricultural use in particular, but it still must be sustainable. So the Cape Floristic region, for example, has 4 biosphere reserves, and the buffer and transition zones work well to extend the effectiveness of the core zone. We take the Kuckelberg Biosphere Reserve. This is off the radar in terms of endemism. 1,650 plant species in just this one biosphere reserve. 77 plant species are endemic to just the reserve. And almost crazily, the more endemic dragonflies, endemic species in terms of their abundance and species richness, than widespread generalists in this particular reserve. It's almost counterintuitive, but that's what it is. Now, the bush crickets are not so rich, but they have high beta diversity, but low alpha diversity. Whether this is because they're fire prone, it's certainly not predators, the bat-eared fox, because we've done research on that. The resource return is not enough. And the ground and aerial arthropods are actually very forgiving. They live throughout the zones. Now, we found that agricultural mosaics maintain significant pollinated diversity. And part of that is to maintain large flower patches. And the importance of having these flower patches, these mass flowering events, is because they have a magnet effect on the pollinators. All these flowers together draw the pollinators. Patches have very high value, and parasitoids have been very clear on this point. Where you get these natural patches arrowed here, you get very distinct assemblages in each of these natural patches. So you can imagine beta diversity is very high. Even abandoned vineyards make a very important contribution to parasitoid conservation. Agroecological farming, you can see there on the left, that's an agroecological farm, and there's a conventional one on the right. It's vineyards in this case. And we've worked on a whole range of aspects of this, quite a lot of detailed research there. But what has come out that maintain remnant habitat, remnant patches, if you like, are critically important, higher crop cover, but the quality must be good inter-row cover crops, reduce tillage and compaction from the vehicles that are going through, and obviously reduce pesticide and fertilizer input. It's quite interesting. There's a lot of difference between the different pesticides. I won't go into that now, but it's a very interesting topic. So to go back to booze again, you'll see on many of the South African wine bottles, integrity and sustainability. This is the shift. It's on most of the wine bottles now. This is the shift because wine is the biggest sector of production in the country. So this is now really leading the way. And it's quite interesting because the public are aware, the average consumer is aware and moving across to support it. Restoration, alien tree clearing. The point is alien tree clearing enables the recovery of ground species. We've done research on that. These logs in the foreground are alien pine trees. Restoration. Now, this is actually a picture of a river. Actually, doesn't look like it, but that's a river. And it's so choked with alien acacia trees, you can't even see the river. But there's a national working for water program to remove these alien trees. This is 2 kilometers down the river. And straight away, as soon as those aliens are removed, there's a remarkable recovery of the all sorts of species, but particularly the endemics. Now, we do a lot of work on dragonflies because it's a very water scarce country. And we found that the dragonflies are very good indicators of the very scarce water supplies. So we've developed this index, Dragonfly Biotic Index. Now, if we take the top of Table Mountain, some of you may have been there. There are no pines there now, not on the top. There used to be pine plantation. And this is one of the old tree stumps where the pines are removed. If we look at the Dragonfly Biotic score before, it was only 10. That was mostly widespread generalists. Afterwards, after removal of the pines, 2-3 years later, the DBI score was 66 times, 600% recovery score. That's incredible. Obviously, they've got to be in the area in order to recolonize. Fortunately, that was the case, as in many of the localities. Climate change, what do we know about that? It's very difficult because the ENSO events, few long-term records, and we know a lot of these species actually evolved in hotter or colder periods in the past. But the botanists identified a sentinel mountain, this particular mountain, we've started doing work on bees and monkey beetles, flies, wasps. And there's a lot of difference between taxa and how they couple with the plants and other aspects of the topography and so on. Now let's move to another biodiversity hotspot. We move up to the northeast there, the higher Midlands, the lower Zululand. There, what we're doing is putting in these large-scale ecological networks of conservation corridors. So this grassland here is fully natural. It's not semi-natural, it's fully natural, obviously with some disturbance. The pines are planted, alien pines, but there are natural forest patches there and the protected areas. So these wide grassland corridors and forest patches are offsets. And South Africa really doesn't have any timber. So the timber is grown, but 500,000 hectares, just under a third, is actually set aside with the aim of resilience, continuance, and evolution of the indigenous fauna and flora. This is the Midlands. All this ongoing development is because of we got an MBSAP and obviously a signatory to the CBD. And it means maintaining healthy aquatic ecosystems, which are critically important in this dry country. At sea level, then we have to consider the megafauna. And these have helped insects. Now there's much more appreciation of insects, but 20, 30 years ago, it was very difficult to convince even the conservationists that are working on the vertebrates. So, oh, but why are insects important? But there's definitely a change now. So we're all on board, but it helps our cause having rare birds and animals as well as the plants on board. So, you know, we're dealing with some very iconic animals here. I find this top picture quite amusing. The giraffes look as though they evolved to be camouflaged against gum trees. Then, of course, the effect is interactive because of the grazing, because of the trampling and so on, and the deposition of dung. Now, these networks, ENs, are equivalent to PAs in their plant diversity and their insect diversity. There can be slight differences, but most of that is because of sampling bias. So we've actually found cases where inside ENs have been richer or more diverse in insects, in other cases inside the PAs and so on. So it varies. But overall, plant diversity and insect diversity are equivalent. It's the same for fresh water, whether it's still water, and there's some hippos at the top here, which stir up the water, and they create heterogeneity on the landscape and his running water situation. So we've researched this in some detail. Now, what is really interesting, this is not big news, but the point is we've looked at it in many ways, landscape heterogeneity, as we're finding all over the world. I'm sure many of you have found the same thing in your research areas, is an essential component. In our part of the world, it includes topography and rockiness. In other words, the mesofilter level of rockiness. And we found it's even more important than corridor design, although obviously we need. Natural forest patches are also really important. Now, these look like forests have been cut down, leaving the grassland. But this is natural grassland, natural forest. It's the fire that maintains these sharp edges. So these natural patches are left very much intact. And all these patches, each one is different in its insect species. It's really, really extraordinary. Now, what about narrow corridors? Can you go to narrow? Well, yes, insects still go in them, but we found, for example, I'll just give you one example. The butterflies in these narrow corridors, they think, oh, we don't want to be here. So they fly 13 times faster overall, on average, to get through that corridor. So it's obviously good for movement, if not for habitat. And obviously there are edge effects. This varies amongst the taxa. Some are more tolerant, it depends on the time of day. Obviously, insect moving back and forth. Some benefit from a bit of shade and others from a bit of sun, and so on and so on. Very complex story. Now, how do we manage for heterogeneity? Two of the biggest issues are livestock grazing, which takes place in this, and also fire. It's very simple. At the end of the day, neither of them must be too intensive, nor must they be neglected. And cattle can replace natural mega-herbivores, but they're not as good. So we've developed now a whole optimal management protocols, and a lot of that is through satellite technology and machine learning. But if you can maintain the mega-herbivores, this is much better than having livestock. They create much more heterogeneity. And furthermore, the dung beetles are very sensitive to the species of mega-herbivore. I just want to finish up with this. I noticed there's going to be some talks on monitoring later on. I've got to tell you, I must say I started my research on acoustics years ago, but we've been using it for assessing value. And we've done quite, well, as you can see, 3 major papers now on this. By God, it's a very effective way, using principally bush crickets, but also frogs. But the bush crickets are better, I've got to be quite honest. Bush crickets say, well, why not grasshoppers? Well, the grasshoppers are not very acoustic in South Africa. I think there are too many predators. Nobody's answered that question. Maybe somebody knows the answer. But the bush crickets do sing, and they are fantastic for measuring landscape change. So what have we learned? So I just summarized just one slide briefly. PAs are important. Extend on PAs with conservation corridors and biosphere reserves. Prepare for the most adverse weather conditions. In other words, for resilience. So the corridors, you want to be big. You want to get rid of alien. Small scale in terms of heterogeneity of refuges. Heterogeneity of refuges, extremely important. Interactions with other organisms. We've always bearing in mind interactions. Conservation is not about entities anymore. It's about interactions. Restore ecological integrity, build in resilience, and maintain evolutionary potential. Manage well, especially for grazing, fire, removal of aliens, and then monitor how well are we doing. Now, the message is that narrow range endemics basically magnify what we should do in insect conservation. They've been through a lot of filters in the past. Now they're facing novel impacts. But if you deal with those novel impacts, they're incredibly resilient. They're not as wussy as one would think endemics are. And I was quite amused by this. What does AI have to say on the question? Well, as Michelle mentioned, this book is in the foyer. And this was an artist, a very talented artist who's familiar with dragonflies, did the cover and other pictures in the book. Very lovely. And my son's very much into AI and drawing. I said to him, why don't you, here's the title, Conservation of Dragonflies, Sentinels, Freshwater. What does AI have to reduce on it? This is what he came up with, remarkably similar. But the only thing is, it's put these vertebrates in the air. Now, you can't tell whether they're birds or pterodactyls, actually. I realize if you're going to give AI a demand, we didn't say the Cretaceous or present day. Perhaps if we'd done that, we would have got it right. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful talk. I'm more curious about the number of wings some of those dragonflies seem to have and where they're attached. Although at least unlike some of the art of humans, they seem to have the right number of legs. Okay, so I think we have plenty of time for questions. So are there any in the room, first of all? Yes, just up there. Do you want to just run the microphone up?
Thank you for your very interesting talk. I have two questions, if it's okay. My first question is when we talk about insects conservation, I am concerned about insects that can bring pathogen to human. So for example, like mosquito, tick, and flies. So lots of control strategy, they want to like kill them because that's the easiest way to cut the transmission. So in viewpoints of ecological system conservation, what will happen if we kill all the mosquito, tick, and flies?
Okay, perhaps I'll give you an example. It's mosquitoes. We have malaria in the northeastern area. And the point is, DDT used to be used. Now, the problem with DDT is not so much it's poisonous per se, but it's persistent. Now there's a move to cypermethrin and similar. And there's much more concentrating in urban areas. So there's a spatial separation. So it's not used in reserve. Now, in the past, there was concern with, in terms of cattle in Ghana, from Tsetse. But that now Tsetse, but it's not controlled in reserve areas anymore. So there's basically large-scale separation, not the ideal, but where there's a priority to, you're talking about pathogens for both human and animals, then we have to be very careful. The pesticide package we've moved, not quite what you're asking, but in agroecology, you can use certain pesticides. Obviously, you cannot use organochlorines, many of the organophosphates and neonicotinoids and so on. But when it comes to the medical aspects and pathogens, it has to be on an area basis, and that spraying takes place mostly in the houses, not out in the natural environment, as it were. I hope that answers your question.
The second question is, recently there is an increasing topic about insect as alternative food. So will be like a threat to the conservation activity for the insects, or it could be like something else?
So you talk about eating insects?
Yes, eating insects.
Right, yeah, okay, well, it's catching on across the world. And of course, as we know, insects are very nutritious. A wide range of all sorts of metabolites and minerals and fatty acids and so on. So, and of course, there are restaurants. I'm sure there are restaurants in Liverpool or London that we certainly have one in Cape Town that specializes in insect food. And Mopani worm, which caterpillar, which occurs in the savanna areas, it is eaten on a regular basis. So there's still a lot of that going on. And of course, there's a lot in Southeast Asia, Ecophylla, for example, and so on. It's an opportunity and it's developing, and there's no reason why that shouldn't clash with insect conservation as a topic of maintaining. But as far as I'm aware, I think there was one, is it a giant bug in China, I think has become highly threatened because of over-harnessing of a water bug that is eaten locally. That's the only one, I don't know, someone might know more. So yes, so long as it's the right thing that's being harnessed. Uganda, for example, Ruspolia, bush crickets are eaten, but that's a very, very abundant bush cricket.
And for anyone who is interested on the use of bugs for food, there is a SIG for that as part of the Royal Entsoc. And I believe they're having some kind of event in a couple of weeks or next month. So do talk to the res members about that. They'll catch you up on it. We've just got a question from online. Wondering what the attitude of farmers and growers in the transition zones are. Are they having a positive approach to adopting these agroecological practices?
Right, thank you. No, not at all. Actually, because particularly, we talk about mostly wine here in this area. And so agroecology works very well because the produce can be sold more readily to chains like it's called Woolworths. We are Marks and Spencer's here, which promote organic food in particular. There are others, of course. Sainsbury's, they also come over regularly. But so the fruit industry is also moving to that. Now, when it comes to the timber, the reason we've moved to this approach as well, there's a strong economic motive, and this is important because the timber is exported to the European Union, and it has to be from Forest Stewardship Council certified in order for the EU to import it. So the point is, we liaise all the time with the producers to make sure what works, what doesn't, and generally they find it's to their benefit particularly to maintain natural habitat, to maintain parasitoids and other natural enemies.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up question from me, because I was actually in South Africa for a field trip last summer.
Right.
How do the private game reserves feature in this protected area network? Do they tend to be on board with protecting the inverts, or are they more interested in the megafauna?
Yeah, well, they're mostly private enterprises. But now there's much more interest in the world in general. And you remember a lot of tourists come in, informed tourists. They get a lot of queries. Well, are you using insecticide anywhere here? You know, how are you growing your vegetables? So these sort of pressures play a very important role in enabling insect conservation along with the megafauna. And simply having these areas where the megafauna are at their most optimum level is an automatic umbrella for many insect species.
I do remember some spectacular dragonflies. Were there some more questions? This lady here. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Alison Carley from James Hutton Institute near Dundee. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed your talk and some beautiful pictures as well. I was also interested in the biospheres, and I wondered to what extent this approach of agroecological farming and the different zones in the biospheres, is this driven by the value chain, by the produce that people want to sell and labeling of it, or is it being driven by government policy coming in and saying we want to set aside land for nature recovery?
I think a simple answer is both. South Africa, although it has many political issues, I must say are pretty good on conservation in general. Mining is an issue in some places, but by and large, I won't say all agricultural sectors, but a lot of the agricultural sectors are moving towards compliance with the CBD, and the local MBSAP is in its second edition, and that's adhered to. And so there is that adherence to agreed international policies. But as I mentioned also, it also comes from the ground up with producers wanting to produce very sound. I'll just give you an example. We had the CEO from Sainsbury's come over a few years ago, and he was saying, well, how can we make sure everything, we've got to check that everything is being grown in a healthy way. Because he said, we have 19 million pairs of feet going through Sainsbury's every day. It takes one clever journalist to spot it's not being done as you say in your label. You can't take the risk. And that kind of said it all for me, I'll be quite honest. And it's the same with the export of timber. It's got to be done in this friendly way because it's driven by sensitive economic forces.
Thank you for that. Do we have any more questions? Yes, just up there, please.
It's really a time course question.
Sorry.
If you've got invasives that have been there a while, the removal thereof removes the habitat for whatever's colonized to the invasives. What's the kind of timescale before you get recovery? And how do you...
How do you know it's fully recovered?
Well, not so much how do you know it's fully recovered, but how do you keep people with you during the inevitable dip when you've removed one set of habitat before something else comes in?
Right, okay. I can only say that a lot of this this restoration is also driven by politics, because the Working for Water program, it was developed not for biodiversity, certainly not for insect conservation, but for maintaining water and supplying jobs. So it became a very beneficial thing to do, because removing the aliens, at least along the rivers, because the rivers are very small. It doesn't take many alien trees to dry them out. So everybody's on board from that point of view. And when those aliens are removed, and it's the same now in for terrestrial plants that are also causing a lot of damage. For example, gums removed because there's competition for the indigenous flowers. Pines are removed because they're even away from water because they're shading. And because tourism, the natural plant industry is so great, there's a lot of motivation to get restoration done. So, and in terms of timing, the recovery, it's really extraordinary. Some of these endemic species, they come back very rapidly. And one of the reasons is because they're adapted to fire and drought refuges and have been fine-tuned to spring back very quickly when things come right. In other words, you make things right for them and they will come back. Now, they've got to be in the local area, in other words, what we call natural capital. Now, on top of Table Mountain, I didn't have time to talk about it here, but on top of Table Mountain, once endemic species didn't come back. And the reason it didn't come back is because it was too far for it to get from, it only lives in the mountains. And it was clearly very scarce even years ago. The type specimen came from Table Mountain, actually, but we'd never seen it anyway there. And there's urbanization in between. So there's got to be natural capital in the local area for things to come back. But if you do that, have those natural habitats, things are incredibly resilient. Does that answer? Okay.
Thank you. Another quick question from me. Just to follow on from that, how long have some of these invasive plant species been in the country? Because I know working in the UK, some of these invasive plants have been here 100, 200 years. So it can be really hard to restore here because it's very hard to get back to that. So I was just wondering, is it a different timescale these invasives have been there?
Most of the really bad invasive trees were brought in sort of 1920s, 1930s. But, you know, as they take so much water, they've got to come out. It's a national imperative. It's not just that, oh, they're foreign, therefore we don't like them. It's the fact that they are really competitive. And so there's been a priority. And a priority, at least with trees, is that at least the wood can be sold for fuel wood and so on. And removal of the trees supplies jobs as well. So there are a lot of, how can I put it, opportunities. Now, other plants it would be impossible to get rid of, like verbena, just to name one. Prickly pear was controlled biologically a few years ago. You still see it occasionally, but its spread was checked with Iceria and other agents. There's a big debate on whether the seed biocontrol agents, the parasitoids that, or the seed predators are playing a role. It was said they were, but a paper's literally just come out last week showing that they're not actually. So we're doing well with some, and in some areas, I'm talking about alien plants, and others not so. We don't seem like you had Rose Bay willow herb, which was sitting around, as I understand it, for years, a sort of sleeping species, and then it took off. We don't seem to have had any like that yet, as far as I'm aware.
Well, we'll avoid shipping in Japanese knotweed and rhododendrons then.
Here you go.
The bane of the conservation community in the UK. Do we have any more questions? This gentleman here.
I was wondering, when we see the species coming back during restoration, do you see a subpopulation of that species coming back, like a certain genetic background of that species become sort of more adaptive to be able to come back?
The recovery is obviously locally sourced, as it were. Now, and so often we say recovery of the species, but molecular work has shown we've got so many, as I mentioned, with those British Scottish grasshoppers. It's not just the grasshopper. It's cicadas, even butterflies that we thought we knew so well. There are many subpopulations, and many of those subpopulations are turning out to be probably separate species. We all know that definition of species is a bit blurred, but anyway. But there are at least a lot of different subpopulations. So this is that large-scale heterogeneity, which is really important to make sure we bring in all those subpopulation. Now, of course, IUCN uses population in a different way from we would use as ecologists, for example. So we've definitely got subpopulations of species that are morphologically very different. So you might get recovery in one area, but maybe it's not such good recovery in another. And the other thing we're finding, there must be many more traits we don't know about. We go for the low-hanging traits of body size, mobility, but how do you know if their gut symbionts are right or some other subtle interaction? And certainly temperature, how a particular subpopulation is relating to elevation and therefore temperature is really important. So one mountain can have a different set of species from another one, or at least can have different subpopulations.
Okay. Do we have any more questions? Lady in the middle.
It sounds like there's lots of really positive conservation action taking place. How kind of hopeful are you feeling for the future of insects in South Africa?
The future of conservation in the future. Well, obviously the removal of aliens must continue. The production of timber must continue with this set-aside approach. So it's basically land sparing, land sharing. And we're taking those approaches. And there's no reason it shouldn't be sustained because there are a lot of winners. Timber industry wins, local people win, the communities win in general, you should, with natural habitat and parasitoids playing a very important role. I'm not saying all crops everywhere. Wheat, for example, the wheat fields, some are quite large. I mean, not like the USA, anything like that, because of the topography. But now, there's relatively little insecticide input, so there must be a lot of biological control going on. We haven't researched that ourselves, but that's as I understand it. In fact, you can see the patches of wheat fields. But we used to take patches of pine trees or wheat fields, for example. We'd say, oh, they're like car parks, there's nothing there. So that we concentrating on the seaside. But after a while, we found that's not actually quite true. Take the pines. Okay, you lose the bush crickets, the butterflies. But the soil fauna, that's incredible, whether it be millipedes or collembola, you name it. The soil fauna hardly changes. It's weird, actually, sometimes. So the future is land sparing, land sharing, keeping a tight rein on particularly persistent pesticides, continue biocontrol of the water weeds, hyacinth and lettuce has worked very well. And make sure everybody is a winner. You can only, that's the only way conservation succeeds. And I literally mean everyone. You know, the person in the street, the consumer, everybody's got to be a winner. When it's a winner, then a lot of people say, oh, didn't know that. You know, so you say about flowers, you say, but we need all the little pollinators to keep all the flowers. And people know, they've heard about big flowers and garden flowers. But when you say, well, actually, all these different flies, because they say, well, what good are flies to me? So, but there are a lot of little flies with long tongues pollinating a lot of all these flowers you see in the fynbos. So you kind of, that kind of outreach and interacting, going as researchers direct to policymakers, going direct to farmers, direct to the public, that's when one really starts getting people on board. It's that sharing of information.
Do we have any more questions? I think we've got time for one or two more. You're going to get your steps in now, up there, please.
Oh, I should talk for longer.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. So obviously there's been a lot of positive benefit on insect diversity, but could I ask, have you measured any sort of benefit to ecosystem services like pollination or waste disposal or that sort of thing?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I find this ecosystem service interesting debate, and I know about this. You know, there are some ecologists who focus on ecosystem services and have no sense of place, and some engineers and ecological engineers say, no, so long as the service is being provided, we want grasses to hold back the bank against the road. Doesn't matter where the grasses come from. So you've got to bring in that concept, ecological integrity. Now, when it comes to ecological integrity, we have two endemic subspecies of honeybee. And they're very efficient pollinators. We need them. We need this incredibly high diversity of pollinating insects. I just mentioned flies now. These all supply. And the monkey beetles also play, hopleaning. They also play a major role in maintaining the flowers. So why do we need this? We need the natural vegetation, the community intact, because there is the flower industry, there's the honey industry. All this, the strength of it lies on the services that are supplied by the insects. And as I mentioned earlier, certain insects are eaten in the country as well. That's a direct service. there's quite a sensitivity in the country to make sure, yes, let's get ecosystem services, but let's have ecological integrity associated with it. So in other words, our endemic honeybee, for example, in the Cape, it's called the Cape honeybee, actually Mellifera capensis, is an incredibly efficient pollinator. And the apple industry uses it in a hives version. We've been doing research on that. Does this have an impact on the wild populations? Seems like not in any major way, because it's all very well saying we've got the service, but are we still maintaining the ecological integrity of the systems? Yeah, interesting point, yeah.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our time slot for the plenary. We'd like to thank Michael again for speaking. We do now have a 30-minute refreshment break, which is also a chance if you'd like to speak to Michael one-on-one, maybe get him to sign his new book while he's at it. Okay, so refreshments are just down in the area downstairs next to the